Continuing from last week's discussion about the collection payment method, this week I will continue to share about another equally important payment method, which is the letter of credit (LC) payment method. Because I think that if you are new to the industry, or if you haven't had much experience working with LCs, you might feel a bit confused when you encounter this payment method, right? So, we will take a very detailed look at how the actual process of the LC payment method works. And if you are an exporter, what is your role or what do you need to do in this LC process? At the same time, I will also answer this for you in today's lesson. That is quite an interesting question. Is LC payment truly 100% safe for exporters? I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's dive straight into today's informative session. Let's go. As usual, I've prepared a small slide so that while I'm guiding you, you can follow along on the screen and easily keep up with today's content. So, what does the actual LC opening process look like? When you hear about LC, you might think it sounds really complicated, doesn't it? But actually, in reality, it really is that complicated, everyone. I'm just kidding. Honestly, once you understand the process, you'll see that it's not as complicated as you might think. Here, with an LC, there are only 4 parties involved. As you can see, the seller is the one selling and the buyer is the one buying. And there are 2 banks involved, so only 4 parties participate. In some cases, the banking process might involve an intermediary bank as well. But if we don't go too deep into banking operations, it's enough to just know there's a seller's bank and a buyer's bank. Alright, okay. There are a total of 8 steps. 8 steps, right? And once you understand these 8 steps, you can be completely confident in handling LCs with customers, or you can confidently manage LCs, or make adjustments and modifications within this process. Alright, the very first step after the seller and the buyer have signed the contract is that, of course, the seller will require the buyer to open an LC so that he can fulfill the order. At that point, the first step begins. The buyer will go to the bank and request the bank to open an LC according to the contract that has been signed between the buyer and the seller. And in return, the bank will require you to make a deposit. Please remember that with an LC, the buyer is required to make a deposit. And this deposit rate can be 100%, more or less. It depends on each bank or the relationship between the bank and the buyer. At this step, there is a very important point. That is, when the buyer requests the bank to open an LC, they will have to fill out a form called the LC application form. They will need to enter the LC information like this. In some places, this is also referred to as the LC draft. So at this point, if we are the seller, we will ask the buyer to send the LC draft, or this LC application form for us to check first, to see if the information is correct or if the terms on this LC draft are acceptable before allowing the buyer's bank to officially issue the LC. Why is that? Because once the official LC has been issued, if we need to amend the LC, it will incur fees and additional costs. Sometimes after that, the buyer may not agree to amend the LC. That's why, before the original LC is issued, the seller or exporter must carefully check the LC draft to make sure everything is correct. Once everything has been checked and both parties have confirmed, only then should the buyer request their bank to issue the official LC. Now, moving on to Mui Tenso 2 here, you'll see there are 1, 2, 3 Mui Tenso 2. At this stage, after the buyer's bank has prepared or issued the official LC, they will notify all relevant parties, including they will notify the buyer, inform the seller's bank, and then send the original LC to the seller's bank. At this point, the seller's bank will forward the original LC to the seller, who is your exporter. Alright, that completes step number 2. Step number 3 involves the seller. After receiving the LC, the seller will produce the goods and deliver them to the buyer. Alright. The next step is that after the shipment is completed, the exporter, or the seller, will gather all the documents required by the LC, right everyone? This set of documents must match or fully comply with the term or the specific documents requested in the LC. After gathering all the required documents, the seller will need to present this set of documents to their bank. Their bank here refers to the seller's bank, everyone. This is represented by arrow number 4. And when the seller's bank receives this set of documents, they will review it according to the LC. If the documents are not in order, they will ask the seller to make adjustments so that everything complies with the LC and is valid under the LC. On the other hand, if everything is correct, what will the seller's bank do next? They will forward the entire set of documents to the bank of the buyer, which is the buyer's bank, also known as the issuing bank. And the next step, this is step 5, and the next step is step number 6. In step 6, the buyer's bank will check the set of documents to see if everything is in order. And this buyer's bank will notify the buyer that the seller has already presented the set of documents. And we continue to step number 7, everyone. After the buyer's bank has checked and confirmed that all the documents are in order, they will proceed to make the payment to the seller's bank and credit the seller's account. Next, in step 8, the buyer will make the payment or accept the payment. In cases where the LC is not an LC at sight, meaning it's not paid immediately, the buyer will take the action of accepting the payment. Only after that will the buyer receive the set of documents from the bank that transfers them. This is step 8, everyone. The buyer pays the bank, and then the bank sends the set of documents back to the buyer, so that the buyer can take the documents to the port or the shipping company to receive the goods, to exchange for the delivery order. Alright, okay. So, we've completed the LC payment process. This process consists of 8 steps, and to summarize, what are the responsibilities of the seller? First, the seller. After requesting the buyer to open the LC, the seller must always remember to ask the buyer to send the LC draft for review. First, check the draft before the official LC is issued. Second, after shipping the goods, the seller needs to gather all the required documents specified in the LC to present to the bank. To the bank. Within the valid time frame. Within the period specified by the LC. If you present the documents late, they will be considered invalid. Those are the actions or tasks that the seller must perform in this LC model, and it's actually quite simple. Now, let's continue by looking at the question, is an LC 100% safe for exporters? If it were up to you, how would you answer? It's a yes or no question. Alright, I will reveal the answer to everyone right now. If we say that LC is a payment method that is due or safe, I would say it is safe and it is still considered the safest among all payment methods. However, it is not 100% safe, everyone. Why isn't it 100% safe? I'll give you 3 scenarios here. The first scenario is an LC that contains strict or difficult terms and conditions. The buyer may intentionally include difficult or even impossible terms for the seller, making the LC invalid, everyone. And when the LC is invalid, they have the right to refuse payment. So please remember, with an LC, you need to check whether the terms in it are difficult or not, and whether they are hard to fulfill. If you are the seller, you need to check everything very carefully. The case 2 is, an LC is not safe when, due to certain objective reasons, the seller delivers the goods or presents the documents later than the deadline specified in the LC. For example, let's say the LC states that the latest shipping date for that shipment is currently June, and they require you to ship the goods by the end of June. At first, according to your initial plan, shipping by the end of June seemed fine, but then, for one reason or another, it's not just that once you've finished production, you can immediately ship the goods. In addition, for example, the customer may require testing reports or inspection results from a third party. If you ask a third party to inspect the goods, some organizations like SGS or BV, for example, it can take about 7 to 10 days to get the results, which may cause delays compared to the scheduled shipping date. Or in another case, you book a vessel but there's no ship available. Shipping lines may tell you that there's no more space or that the vessels are fully booked. So you have to postpone to July, and in such cases, this is considered a non-compliance with the OC, and you have already delivered the goods later than the OC required. At this point, the buyer has the right to refuse payment to you. And now, the third case. The third case is if the LC is already non-compliant. Then whether or not you get paid will depend heavily on the goodwill of the buyer. For example, in the previous case, the LC states that this order or shipment must be delivered by the end of June. But you, for some objective reason, maybe due to shipping issues or sourcing goods, you end up delivering after June, say, at the beginning of July. In this case, the LC becomes non-compliant, right? So, if you want to receive payment, you'll have to rely on two options. The first option is to ask the buyer, the person who requested the LC issuance, to amend the LC. You might need to request this amendment even before you ship the goods. Once you realize that the LC might become non-compliant, you should ask the buyer to amend it. The two option, if you don't have enough time to amend the LC, is to ask the buyer to accept the non-compliance. Both of these two options will incur fees. Whether you amend the LC or accept the non-compliance, there will be fees involved. The bank will charge you these fees. And whether the buyer agrees to amend the LC or to accept the non-compliance depends entirely on the buyer's goodwill. If the buyer says no, it means that this LC will have no value and you may not receive any payment at all. That being said, in my experience, I've noticed with an LC, both parties have a relationship. Generally, we also carefully select the partners we do business with before signing a contract with them. So, in cases of discrepancies, we'll also inform the client so they can support us and make amendments to the LC. Amending the LC is considered the safest approach. But if it's not possible to amend the LC in time, we'll also ask the client if they can accept the discrepancies in the LC. Most clients usually agree to this. We'll pay a fee of about $40 to $50 per time. Sometimes, it's up to $100 or even $150 per LC discrepancy. But we have to accept it to get paid, right? Alright, so you can go to this link if you haven't done so before. If you've never seen a sample LC before, you can visit the link visual.com. There, you'll find documents you can download, including a set of export documents along with an LC for your reference. Alright, that wraps up today's sharing session from Vi. I hope this information will be helpful to you all. And if you found this video helpful, please feel free to hit the like button and share it with your colleagues or friends who are also working in the export field. Once again, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.